The first snowstorm of the year hit the mountains harder than anyone expected. Jason Miller, a 26-year-old outdoor enthusiast, thought it would be exciting to take a weekend trip up into the Rockies with his girlfriend, Emma. They packed light, planning to spend 2 nights in a rented cabin. The forecast had called for light snow, but once they were deep into the mountains, the weather turned violent. The roads were nearly invisible, snow piling up faster than the windshield wipers could keep up. By the time they realized how dangerous it had become, it was too late to turn back. Their GPS lost signal, and with no cell service, Jason drove blindly through the storm. That's when he spotted a dark shape through the curtain of snow. It was an old cabin, weathered and leaning, but at least it offered shelter. The place wasn't on any map, but it was either that or risk freezing inside the car. They parked by the tree line, grabbed their bags, and rushed to the door. Surprisingly, it was unlocked. The inside smelled like damp wood and mildew, but it was warmer than the storm outside. The furniture was covered in sheets, dust layering every surface. Emma whispered that it felt like someone had just walked out and never returned. Jason lit a fire in the old stone fireplace, and soon enough, the cabin felt bearable. They ate a quick dinner from their supplies and tried to shake the unease that hung in the air. Around midnight, Emma woke Jason, whispering frantically. She claimed she heard footsteps on the porch. Jason brushed it off as wind or branches scraping against the wood. But when he got up to check, he saw boot prints leading up the front door, but none leading away. He quickly bolted the door, heart pounding. As the storm howled outside, the noises grew louder. Footsteps circled the cabin, slow and deliberate. At one point, something heavy slammed against the sidewall, rattling the windows. Jason grabbed the fireplace poker and stood guard while Emma stayed under the blankets. Hours passed, and the sounds eventually faded into silence. In the morning, when the storm eased, Jason decided to take a quick look outside. The footprints were clearer in the fresh snow. They circled the cabin again and again, overlapping in a dizzying spiral. But what unsettled him most was that there weren't just one set of prints. There were dozens, all sizes, some small like a child's, some large, bigger than his own, and yet they all stopped at the cabin's front steps. Jason didn't wait another second. He and Emma packed up, sprinted back to the car, and navigated the still dangerous roads until they finally found their rental cabin miles away. When the property manager heard their story, his face went pale. That cabin, he said, had been abandoned for nearly 50 years, after a family was found dead inside during a blizzard. No one ever figured out how they died. Jason and Emma never went back to the mountains in winter again. Part 2. The Snowplow Driver's Midnight Passenger. David Rhodes had been a snowplow driver in upstate New York for 15 years. He was used to long, lonely nights clearing highways during the worst storms. But one December night, he experienced something that made him question everything he thought he knew. It was just past 2 a.m. when David spotted a figure standing by the roadside. It was a young woman, no coat, no hat, just a thin white dress that whipped in the freezing wind. Concerned she'd freeze to death, he slowed the plow and stopped. She climbed in silently, her skin pale and lips trembling. She whispered her name was Lily and said she needed a ride to her house down the road. David nodded and kept driving, glancing over at her every so often. She never looked back, only out the window into the swirling snow. 10 minutes later, David pulled onto the small road she directed him to. When they reached the driveway of an old farmhouse, Lily finally turned to him. Her eyes looked glassy, almost lifeless, and she thanked him in a voice so faint he barely heard it. She stepped out of the plow and walked toward the house. David sat there for a moment, uneasy, before deciding to knock on the door just to be sure she was safe. An older woman answered, bundled in a heavy sweater. David explained that he'd picked up Lily and dropped her off. The woman's expression drained of color. She whispered, "That's not possible. Lily was my daughter. She died in a car accident on this very road 5 years ago, during a storm just like this one." David stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat. The woman pointed to the snow where Lily's footprints should have been, but there were none. The ground remained untouched, no sign of her passing. Shaken, David drove off into the night, unable to focus on the road. When he glanced at the passenger seat one last time, his heart nearly stopped. The seat was damp, as if covered in melted snow. He never drove that stretch of highway without thinking of Lily again. Part 3. The Ice Fisherman's Last Catch. Minnesota winters were brutal, but for locals like Ethan Walker, ice fishing was a tradition. Every year, he and his two friends, Brian and Caleb, set up a shack on the frozen lake and spent the night fishing, drinking, and telling stories. But one year, things went terribly wrong. The storm rolled in quicker than expected. By the time they realized how bad it would get, it was too late to head back to shore. They stayed in the shack, trying to laugh off their nerves. Hours passed. The wind shrieked outside, and the ice groaned under the weight of the storm. Around midnight, Ethan swore he heard knocking. 3 sharp raps from under the ice. His friends laughed, saying he'd had too much to drink. But the knocking came again, louder this time. Caleb leaned down, pressing his ear against the frozen surface, and his face drained of color. He whispered, "There's someone down there." They all stared at the dark water through the fishing hole. For a moment, it was still. Then a pale hand slapped against the ice from underneath, fingers splayed, nails scraping. The 3 men stumbled back in shock. Brian tried to rationalize it, saying maybe someone fell through another part of the lake. But the hand pressed harder, followed by another and another. Soon, dozens of pale hands clawed at the ice, slamming and scraping, as though a crowd was trapped beneath the frozen surface. The sound was unbearable, the ice trembling with every hit. Ethan grabbed his gear, screaming that they had to leave. But when they opened the shack door, the blizzard had buried everything outside. The lake was gone under a wall of white. By morning, search teams found the shack half collapsed, the men inside shaken and frostbitten. They made out alive, but swore they'd never ice fish again. What haunts Ethan most is what he saw just before dawn, when the storm finally calmed. The fishing hole was filled with water, perfectly still. But deep below, dozens of faces stared up at him through the ice, their mouths open in silent screams.